I do believe strongly that the relationship that one has with their loved one that has memory loss can be meaningful.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and for you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
Great. So hi, Don. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. So my name is Maureen OConnor. I am a neuropsychologist. I wear a lot of different hats. I do both clinical work, working with patients and families, and also research. So wearing my clinical hat, the most typical situation that I'm in is having someone in my office. I work specifically with older adults that's worried about their memory and thinking, and they come to me to do pencil and paper tests of memory and thinking so that I can try to understand whether the things that they're noticing are part of the normal aging process or whether there may be something else going on. Then I offer a diagnosis in my office to the person and their family members and recommendations. I also will often meet with family members for more extended periods of time to help them understand the diagnosis better, understand how to manage problems or their own emotions and reactions to the situation that they find themselves in. In my research world, I'm very interested in doing research to help understand the lived experience of persons with dementia and their family members, and using that understanding to create interventions that can be helpful. So I'd love to hear a little bit about you.
My name is Donald Bobula. I'm at the North Olmsted, Ohio community. It's the brand new building, by the way. It started in June. It's a 1-year anniversary this month. This feeling of dementia, or the beginning of my wife's Alzheimer's, was a very subtle way of finding it out. First, there was very little clues. I love her very much, and there's one of the reasons why I'm here for at least now, I think, 9 months. I didn't know it, but my wife was wanting to call my mother-in-law, who died in 1994, and this was just last September when this all happened. But she was calling before, and I just let it go. You know, she's calling, nobody's going to be there, and left it with that. And then eventually I kept saying, well, she died. Oh, wait, she didn't die. I just talked to her yesterday, or something like that. No, I just fluffed it off. And then it got a little bit worse, because she was calling about 3 a.m, unbeknownst to me, to my daughter, and then to my son, who lives in Dallas. And Dad, did you know what she's doing? I said, well, I still forget it as something was just, well, a little bit forgetfulness, and that's all it was. Well, in September, right in the middle of September, it got bad. At 3 a.m, she drove our new car to the North Olmsted police station, which is about 3 miles away, maybe 2, and didn't know how to get back. And then a policeman called me at 3 a.m. saying, do you have another car? And I said, it's the only one we have. So they escorted her back. And I didn't still think too much of it. It's very strange anyway, but police scares me, and hopefully it scared the police. Anyway, they didn't know what they were finding when they thought they'd find somebody giving her a problem. And I didn't. So the next day, I put the burglar alarm on, which says if she gets up at night at all, she don't know it, she'll turn it off, it'll go off. Well, sure enough, 2 days later, I was about 11:45 at night. She went out. I heard the alarm go off. And she got up before I could, and she stood on the curb and screamed, help me, help me. And the next door neighbor was just coming home, and she ran into their arms and help me. And that was it. And then, well, I guess she said, I don't want to go home with that man. I don't want to go inside, something like that, because I didn't get all the words. But it was not, that was it. She didn't want to be with me. Well, instead of, they called the police, of course, thinking, you know, that helped me was the first cry for help. It was, you need a police person. So the policeman came. And then they contacted my daughter, and she went home with my daughter, which was about, 2-3 miles away. And I didn't know it, but by the next couple hours or so, they had taken her to Southwest, well, it wasn't Southwest, it was University Hospital. And they tested her, and she had what they call a urinary tract infection, which can affect the mental, well, like a nervous breakdown, thinking it's temporarily. It was COVID virus time, so the hospital was jammed in Cleveland, so they sent her to Medina, Ohio hospital. And that was at that time, it was like, it wasn't a university, it was Cleveland Clinic. Then I went to see her, and she wouldn't let me in her room. It was about 4 or 5 days or so. She was in the hospital, maybe even a week, but I sat outside the door for a few hours, waiting that that moment would open up and she'd see me. Well, it didn't, except I think once. And then the doctor who was looking at her brain scan, and I could go back further than this if you want. We did both have brain scans, and I don't know why, because one of our friends suggested that we see this Dr. Tushi, who was a geriatric doctor who could determine when major problems occur, like Alzheimer's. She had a brain scan, I had a brain scan. My brain scan couldn't find anything but my brain, thank God. She had a brain scan, and they showed they had a light coating over the top of her brain and a little spot that he said would affect her walking, which he called the beginning of Alzheimer's. So having done that, I still thought, well, if she does have Alzheimer's, I should go back to say her mother had it. And she was a very gentle person, my mother-in-law. She stayed with us for about 6 years, and then eventually she had to go into a nursing home. So all these things ended up to say, wow, this is a big change in our life, no doubt. So when she got out of the Medina Hospital, she went into Arden Court, which specializes in dementia patients. And I said, well, that's going to be it. We'll never see each other again or never be together again. And I loved her. I still do. So when the time came to make arrangements, we took her out, and it was good that Vitalia said, oh, you can have a room. It's just kind of new to them and new to me, of course. You could rent a room for one for you and one for her. I said, that'll work out for me. And so far it has been. Well, anyway, as time goes by, it seems to get worse. But just a good example, as I was telling the lady over here, whose right name I can't think of, Angela. Okay, Ashley, right, Ashley. So I got a little dementia too. I'm pretty good at names normal. Ask me who the president, I'll tell you it's. Anyway.
Yeah, so you've had quite a story getting to a diagnosis, getting to understand why your wife's behavior was different than it had always been.
Right. And we were watching for it because, as I mentioned, we did both have brain scans. And because my mother-in-law having that situation, we was quite aware of it. But what Dr. Tushi says would affect her walking, didn't mention memory at all. And that was something that, well, I guess she got evaluated. And when they said, do you know where we're living? She got that right. Do you know where you are now? She said Cleveland, but it was really Lakewood. But who knows when you change the border, it's Lakewood instead of Cleveland. So all those little things did come out right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it can be difficult taking that journey to getting an initial diagnosis, particularly because there are a number of different conditions that can affect memory and thinking as we get older. And understanding what those things are is the first step in trying to understand what's going on with your loved one that has memory loss. And that can be quite a process.
Well, I understand that the biggest problem I have is having my heart control my head. I know psychologically speaking, it's very dangerous to continue always being, okay, I forgive you, or okay, wanting to correct something, and it's that you can't correct just by saying the right words. My daughter lives, just like I said, 7/10 of a mile. She has a tremendous way of just taking her off the subject. I mean, she could just say, oh, look at that beautiful star over there, or look at that tree. And all of a sudden she forgot what she was angry about. I wish I had that gift. But being so close and being so wanting to really help her, which I think I'm helping her, when I said, and she uses this word so much, dead. My mother's dead. This one, I said, Marlene, we are Christians. We know that somebody who lives to whatever age it is, even if it's 96 or 97, does not just dead. I think dead, you're in hell. Okay. You just changed address, as Billy Graham said. You know, I haven't died. I just changed address. And that's how we believe. Our faith is very strong. And it gets me through an awful lot. And that's why I'm so thankful for our faith.
Yeah, of course. I do think it's a challenge for the families I work with to understand how they can manage some of the changes that they see in their loved one. And you mentioned your daughter-in-law. Did I remember that correctly? Your daughter?
Our daughter, yeah.
Your daughter. So you mentioned your daughter, who you said has a nice way, of sort of saying, oh, look at that bird, or, look at this other thing. And that skill of being able to redirect somebody when they're having a problem with their memory or behavior, or they're sort of stuck on a subject that is difficult for them and making them agitated or unhappy, it is, I think, a really important one, and something that everybody can cultivate if they try. Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I think that's something that it sounds like comes naturally to your daughter, but something that we certainly work to teach the caregivers that we work with.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, and that's her gift. What is dementia and what are the different types? Now, is that something that I'd like to ask you? Because besides Alzheimer, I mean, there might some types of dementia that's just very natural. Or is that, can you explain that to me?
Yeah, I certainly can. So when we think of the term dementia is, I think it can be quite a difficult and misunderstood term. It really is simply a very broad term that refers to three things. There are sort of three criteria that need to be met to say that someone has dementia. One is that there is a change in memory and thinking abilities that the person or someone else in their life is noticing. Two is that the change is also noticeable on formal tests of memory and thinking that you might take in your doctor's office or at a specialist's office. And three is that those changes cause problems in everyday functioning, your ability to do things the way that you could always do. The thing that I think is a bit confusing and important to understand is that saying that someone has dementia is just like saying that someone has a headache. It doesn't tell you the why, the cause of the dementia. And I, as a specialist, think it's very important to understand the cause. So if somebody says you or your loved one has dementia, I think the next important question is, from what? What's causing the dementia? And as you've been through, that can be challenging sometimes to understand what's causing it. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia over the age of 65. But there are other types of more common dementias, like something called Lewy body dementia, which involves changes in physical function, sometimes things like visual hallucinations. There's also under the age of 65, the most common type of dementia, that is frontotemporal dementia, which primarily involves personality changes. And then there are all sorts of other things that can cause problems with memory and thinking and functioning in everyday life. So, sort of understanding what the cause is that next step after you notice that there are changes in memory and thinking.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that term, Lewy body dementia. My son-in-law is a insurance man, and he's heard of that term. And one of the things I think Lewy, whatever that dementia is, cause shaking. That's one of the signs that you've got a problem, and stability. Well, the other question I have is memory loss something that everyone will have to deal with as they age?
Yeah, so it depends what you mean by that question. You earlier had forgotten the name of the young lady behind you. And so there are some changes that happen with difficulty remembering names being a common one that are very normal as we get older, just like there are normal changes that happen in our physical function. So everybody, complains as they get older of things like, more difficulty remembering names, or, forgetting where they put their keys, for example, walking into a room and forgetting why. And those are things that everybody experiences as they age to, one degree or the other. But dementia is actually not something that the majority of older adults in the US experience. So only 10% of older adults over the age of 65 in the United States have dementia. Now that number increases with age, but even for older adults over the age of 85, only 33% roughly have dementia. So dementia is not something that is an inevitable part of of aging. Memory changes are, but not dementia. Dementia really is a disease of the aging brain.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I'll say one of the things that's helping me is our iPhone. Like if I can't remember who starred in a certain movie, and who starred in the film, I got it. So I think the computers, in some ways, those little simple things like that help you. At least I'm not so bad. It's just a matter of something wasn't incidental. Okay, I can
Absolutely.
Really helps.
Absolutely.
Okay, I have another question. How do things change when a loved one develops dementia? Now that is where the problem lies.
Right. So it sounds like, when you were telling your story, I was hearing a lot of things that are part of a typical story of how things change when someone develops dementia. And the first thing that I heard you saying is that, you were trying to manage just simply the experience of noticing that something didn't seem quite right with your wife.
Right.
That she, was asking for people that she should have known were deceased, and things just didn't add up. And at first you were sort of like, well, you said you shrugged it off a little bit, which I think is very, very common. And then as you were having more experiences, you started trying to understand, well, how can we figure out what's going on here, right? And that is part of a typical journey. And the part of trying to figure out what's going on initially can sometimes be a challenge because people aren't always on the same page. The person with memory loss may not be as cooperative with things like going to get an evaluation, going to see a specialist or a doctor, and that can be difficult. Then there's the next part of your journey, which is also very common, which is receiving and dealing with the news of a diagnosis, being told that the person that you love has dementia, and trying to understand for yourself and your family, what does that mean? What does that mean for our lives? How do we understand what we need to do moving forward, what we need to prepare for? And later, because these are progressive diseases, I think there's the reality of having to manage changes in memory and thinking and behavior and functioning. And there are certain changes that are predictable and sort of common to the disease if you know what the diagnosis is, and others that may be more likely to happen, but may also not happen. And then others that might be idiosyncratic to the person that has dementia. So I think that landscape can be a challenge to navigate because it is a changing landscape.
Well, I like what you said about being prepared. You might be seeing the signs that help you be prepared for an answer that doesn't cause her to panic or cause her to feel like the worst word she can use is crazy. Never use that word, that's for certain. But the hardest thing to remember is to slow down, which is one of my problems. I speak too much. You can probably tell that. Okay. And listen, not enough. But my wife was a great listener. She always was. And I was a speaker. Whether it was great or not, that's to be determined. But anyway, I have another question for you. How can people, when a loved one takes on a caregiver role, which I have, what challenges might arise?
Yeah. Well, from the perspective of the disease, you will observe your loved one having more problems with memory and thinking. Personality changes are also common, and these things are going to impact what your loved one is able to do in everyday life. So at some point, you'll need help taking care, you'll need to help your loved one take care of things that they used to be able to do on their own, like paying bills or managing medications, or you'll need to try to put in place a solid plan for getting that help from someone else. I think that in the shadow of all of these changes, it's very common for families to also be managing family dynamics related to who is going to provide care, what decisions need to be made about the future and future planning. And then there is, of course, as I think you have shared with us, the emotional toll that the disease takes, the sort of adjustment to having a diagnosis and what that means, having your loved one exhibit changes in behavior and memory and personality, and trying to manage that experience as well.
Well, that helps a lot. I was just going to say, one of the things that when you were talking about was the anticipation of what starts the regression. Sometimes they're usually at, we call this phrase, sundowner's disease. When it gets dark, there's a chime when you can almost predict that. But now it's not so often it's just sundowners, but could be right in the middle of the afternoon. Could be when she wakes up with a question of where are we? And those kind of things just, wow, I didn't think this would progress so fast, or it feels so, hard. All right, my next thought is, what methods are there for loved ones to take on the caregiver role with the minimum stress or turmoil? Minimum stress and turmoil.
Well, it is, I appreciate your reaction, Don, because I had the same reaction. Minimum is quite a word, I think, to use there, because it is often very stressful. I think that one important point that I try to repeat for the caregivers I work with is you can't pour from an empty cup.
Well
So
said.
when we think about taking care of the person that we love that's experiencing memory loss, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. And that can be very difficult for caregivers and families of someone with memory loss. Often caregivers are so focused on providing great care to their loved one that they stop taking care of themselves. They don't go to their own doctor's appointments. They don't follow through with their own medical management, but they also do everything like perfectly for the person that they're taking care of.
That's right. That's
So,
exactly.
yeah, so I do think that, you know, the first step in trying to reduce some of the stress is making sure that you're making time to take care of yourself. And I think something that helps with this is to have the conversation with caregivers that you really can't pour from an empty cup. So it's not just about taking care of yourself. It's about the fact that you will not be able to provide your best care to the person that you love unless you're taking care of yourself too.
That's what my children think of. And I always use this analogy when you're flying on a plane and the oxygen masks drop down and the oxygen level is decreasing. You must put it on your face first so you can help the person you want to help. And I realized that I just did that this day. In fact, I took my first long walk, which happened to be probably a mile and a half. We live within about 3 houses or 4 houses from my church. So I walked to church, crossing the main street of Lorraine, which is a lot of traffic, sat there for a little bit while, came back and I said, wow, I went to church for the first time walking in 70
Wow.
years, or 60 years of marriage.
I think that's great. And I love your analogy. I love your analogy of the oxygen mask. I'm going to adopt that if it's okay with you.
Okay, you could ask the airlines if you can. Anyway, and there's another question. How do you create a pleasant and functional environment? That's part of that question that I have. How do you create a pleasant and a functional environment?
Yeah, I would start just by acknowledging that everyone is different. What's pleasant for one person is sort of different than what might be pleasant for another. That said, I think that you can create a wonderful environment with things like music. Music can be an incredibly powerful tool to creating a pleasant environment. And when you think about the scope of the benefit of music, you know, you can use soothing music to help create a calm environment if there's agitation. You can use more energizing tunes if the person needs a little bit of help with get up and go. And I have found it can also be very useful for helping to ease transitions, like getting a loved one with dementia to bathe or for example, to go to bed. So I think that music is incredibly powerful and certainly one thing that you can do to create a pleasant environment.
Well, it's funny you should say that because I was thinking of writing a song when my wife and I were dating. I'll sing a little bit of it and you could see whether it's worth getting it recorded. But the love of my life is you, forever and ever, dear. Dear one, sweet one, to you I'll still be true. That's all I got so far, but it's true that everything I said. And I really felt that does help bring back a pleasant memory from our first 10 or 20 years of marriage. And of course, we have other songs that we remember how beautiful they were. But I'll go on to the next thought I have, a question. Is it possible to retain elements of the relationship you've had when you take on the role of a caregiver?
Yes, this is I think, not an easy question to answer. Caregivers do certainly feel the loss of the old relationship that they had, and that needs to be honored.
Yeah.
It's normal, that's expected, it's okay. While I think it's possible to retain elements of the old relationship, I do think that caregivers need to be prepared for change in the relationship. But I also think that it can be helpful to start by acknowledging that relationships always change over time. So with a couple, for example, the relationship they had when they're dating is different from the relationship they have early in their marriage. And that's probably different from the relationship that they have after they have children. And so relationships are dynamic and have the ability to be fluid. I do believe strongly that the relationship that one has with their loved one that has memory loss can be meaningful. And so it is not to say that the relationship will be the same, but I believe that you can still find meaning and moments of joy in the relationship, even in the later stages of the disease.
Mm-hmm. Well, that happens. And as there's certain times, just when I get very sentimental, just holding her hand while we're laying in bed, just holding, that's why I would stay as long as I possibly can, just to be with her, and to me, it's like our first time we ever held our hands, so I get a little teary-eyed when I talk about that, but I really did enjoy the fact that I can for these few months. Well, another question I have is, what can someone who is not a direct caregiver do to support the caregiver and person with dementia?
Many things. First, I think just support. Calling to say hello, checking in, being a shoulder, inviting someone to take a walk, to spend time together. That is a very important role that anybody that is not a direct caregiver can help to fill. I think second, acts of service, even very small acts of service, can make a big difference. So things like having a neighbor pick up your medications when they're going to pick up their own at CVS, or mowing someone's lawn, or visiting the person with memory loss so that the caregiver might be able to have a little free time. All of these little things that people can do can add up to relieve some small amount of burden that makes a big difference.
Well, I've noticed one of the things of being the only independent person living in a memory care area, I'm finding myself being kind of really looking for something to do. I find myself kind of looking at somebody's needs, meeting them. Of course, the staff is overworked and underpaid. I always say that. And so I don't mind being here and being a helper. That's one of the things, I guess, I was born with the gift of doing that, because I was the seventh child of 7 children. And my sister and I would help my father when everybody was out of the nest because he had diabetes. And I guess it's inborn with me. The danger is overcommitting myself, as I said. It can't be all things to all people. That's one of the things I've learned. It's really become stressful. The ability to recognize and see that today was a good example, a very special day. As I told you, I got in my walk to church and those things. And there were several needs. We have a fellow who has no concept of the English language here. He's a Greek, and his dementia occurred. He was able to speak some English, and then he lost the memory from the English, and he speaks Greek. Yeah. Well, helping him out, and he does a beautiful sign language. You could tell he has a beautiful sense of humor. He taps me on the head 3 times to say hello. I guess the word Alzheimer's is almost under, overused, because some people can think, is this or is this not Alzheimer's? And a clear definition of it. And I know it was only discovered, I think, about maybe 100 years ago, the term even came up. Nobody lived that long to get it, I guess. And you say it could happen as early as 55, after 55. I wondered why they had this term, you can't live here unless you're 55. I thought, why not 60 or 65? But it's kind of frightening. But I think you're doing a great work, what you're doing now, because it's helping me just to have this little discussion. I hope our, whoever's zooming it in and listening to this will be as affected by it as the way I am.
Well, Don, I'm also so happy to be here with you. I actually think that there are a lot of parts of your story that are also very helpful to people and illustrate things that I talk about in my office. This sort of idea of trying to take care of yourself by taking your walk today. That's just fabulous that you got that in. And I can see when you tell the story that you feel a little refreshed by that. And,
Exactly.
That's wonderful. And I also, think that sharing with me that you feel such a sense of contentment and satisfaction out of the simple act of holding your wife's hand is something that I think is also important for people to hear, because that's something that you can do even in later stages of the disease, when people wonder to themselves, how can I still connect to the person I love? And that's a very simple act that it is obvious means so much. I can see that when you talk about that, and I hope others can see that as well. I think it's clear. So I think you've helped illustrate some of these things I talk about in my office.
Well, one of the things that I said in our early stages of meeting my wife, I want someone who needs me more than I need them. I didn't know what I was asking for, because I needed what Marlene has, the compassion, the gentleness, the kindness, the manners. I have to say she made me what I am today. I guess it's a mutual thing that we've done together. And when I come to the fact that, when you get what you ask for, you better watch out. You might get too much need and you're not taking care of yourself. So it kind of ties that up. That really was all I had to say. I was just very glad to be here and help where I can.
Yeah. Don, would you mind if I ask you a question?
You go ahead.
I'm wondering if you can share with me how long you've been married.
We've been married 60 years, as June 9th, 1962 is when we got married. So today's what, Tuesday? So it was only 60 years and five days. Okay, but who's counting? I was glad to make this 60th. I'm like telling you, and I'm so appreciative of what everybody's done, because my sister was married 70 years and was always 5 years older than me and married 5 years sooner than me. And I wanted to, at least get the big 60, and we did. And whatever now I considered as gravy.
Well, happy belated anniversary.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And I think to myself, what a